Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the most isolated place on Earth. Picture endless white stretches that seem to go on forever, where the wind carries secrets that have been buried for thousands of years. Now imagine that beneath all that pristine, untouched ice, something is waiting. Something has always been waiting. Welcome to Antarctica, the sleeping continent that might not be as empty as we've been told. Tonight, we're going to take a gentle journey to the bottom of our world, where the mysteries run deeper than the ice itself. Pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, and let's explore together what might be the most carefully guarded secret on our planet. Antarctica wasn't always the frozen wasteland we know today. This might surprise you, but if you could travel back in time, say, about 100 million years ago, you'd find yourself in a lush, green paradise. Dense forests stretched across the continent. Rivers meandered through valleys that are now buried under miles of ice. The air was warm, humid, filled with the sounds of life. Scientists have found fossilized leaves, ancient tree stumps, and evidence of dinosaurs that once roamed these now frozen lands. Massive tree trunks, perfectly preserved in the dry valleys of Antarctica, tell us that forests once covered this continent from coast to coast. These weren't small, struggling plants eking out an existence in harsh conditions. These were towering giants, some over 40 feet tall, that thrived in a temperate climate. The fossil record paints a picture of a vibrant ecosystem. Ferns carpeted the forest floors. Flowering plants dotted meadows that stretched to horizons now buried under ice sheets 2 miles thick. Streams and rivers carved networks through valleys, carrying life, giving water from mountain peaks to coastal plains, where ancient creatures gathered to drink. But here's where things get interesting, where the first whispers of mystery begin to emerge from the ice. Some researchers suggest that Antarctica's warm period lasted much longer than mainstream science admits. Much, much longer. While conventional geology tells us that Antarctica has been frozen for at least 15 million years, there's growing evidence that parts of the continent remained ice, free far more recently than we've been taught to believe. In dusty archives and private collections around the world, there exist maps that shouldn't exist. Maps drawn in the 1500s and 1600s that show Antarctica in remarkable detail. But here's the thing, they show it without ice. They show coastlines, mountain ranges, and river systems that we've only recently discovered using modern satellite technology and ground-penetrating radar. The most famous of these is the Piri-Reis map from 1513. Admiral Piri-Reis was an Ottoman navigator who compiled his map from older sources that, according to his own notes, dated back thousands of years. When modern cartographers compared his Antarctic coastlines to what we know lies beneath the ice today, they were stunned. The accuracy was impossible for its time. The map shows Queen Maud Land's coastline with precision that matches modern satellite measurements. It depicts mountain ranges that we've only recently confirmed exist beneath the ice. Most remarkably, it shows these features as they would appear without ice cover, something that wouldn't have been possible to observe in 1513, when Antarctica was already deep in its current ice age. But the Piri-Reis map wasn't alone. The Orontius Phineus map from 1531 shows the entire Antarctic continent, complete with mountain ranges and rivers, all free of ice. The Mercator map from 1569 depicts Antarctica as 4 separate landmasses connected by waterways, a configuration that matches what we now know exists beneath the ice sheet. These features exist, but they're buried under ice sheets that are over 2 miles thick in some places. The Transantarctic Mountains, the Ellsworth Range, the vast network of subglacial valleys, all of these are accurately depicted on maps drawn centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. How could mapmakers from the 1500s know about geographical features that we've only discovered in the last few decades? The conventional explanation is that these were just educated guesses or artistic interpretations, but the level of accuracy suggests something else entirely. Perhaps these maps were copied from much older sources. Perhaps there was a time not too long ago in geological terms when Antarctica was accessible, when it was inhabited. Consider this. The medieval mapmakers who drew these charts weren't explorers themselves. They were compiling information from existing sources, many of which they acknowledged were ancient beyond their understanding. Piri-Reis specifically noted that his map was based on charts that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, and possibly even earlier. This suggests a chain of cartographic knowledge stretching back thousands of years. knowledge that originated from direct observation of Antarctica when it was ice-free. But when could such observations have been made? And by whom? Professor Charles Hapgood was a quiet academic who taught at Keene State College in New Hampshire. He wasn't the type to court controversy or make wild claims. His background was in medieval and ancient history, subjects that seemed far removed from geological speculation. But in the 1950s, Hapgood proposed something that would shake the foundations of geological thinking. He suggested that the Earth's crust could shift dramatically and suddenly, moving entire continents to different latitudes almost overnight. It sounds impossible, but Hapgood had done his homework. He'd spent years studying geological evidence, ancient maps, and astronomical data. Even Albert Einstein found his theory compelling enough to write the foreword to Hapgood's book, The Path of the Pole. Einstein wrote, "His idea is original, of great simplicity, and, if it continues to prove itself, of great importance to everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface." According to Hapgood's research, Antarctica had been located much closer to the equator until approximately 12,000 years ago. The continent sat roughly where it is today, but the entire Earth's crust was rotated differently relative to the planet's axis of rotation. This meant that what we now call the South Pole was actually located somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, while Antarctica enjoyed a temperate climate similar to that of modern-day Chile or southern Argentina. Then, due to some catastrophic event, perhaps a massive asteroid impact or the sudden redistribution of ice weight, the entire crust shifted. Like a loose orange peel sliding around the fruit inside, the Earth's outer shell moved as a unit. Antarctica slid southward into the polar region, while other continents shifted to compensate. If this happened, the effects would have been devastating beyond imagination. Any civilization living on Antarctica would have had perhaps days or weeks before their temperate homeland became a frozen wasteland. Cities would have been abandoned, people would have fled or perished, and then, slowly but inexorably, the ice would have begun to build, layer upon layer, year after year, until everything was buried under miles of frozen water. This might sound like science fiction, but there's evidence suggesting that something dramatic did happen around 12,000 years ago. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas period, a time when global temperatures suddenly plummeted, ice sheets advanced rapidly, and many species went extinct. Sea levels rose dramatically as ice melted in some areas and accumulated in others. The Younger Dryas wasn't a gradual climate change, it was a sudden, catastrophic shift that happened over the course of just a few years. Ice core data from Greenland shows that temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Megafauna that had survived the last ice age suddenly went extinct. What could cause such a dramatic shift? Many researchers point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the idea that a massive asteroid or comet struck the Earth around 12,800 years ago. The impact would have caused worldwide climate chaos, but it might also have been powerful enough to shift the planet's crust. Evidence for this impact is mounting. Researchers have found a layer of platinum and other rare metals in sediment cores dating to exactly this time period. These metals are common in asteroids but rare on Earth's surface. They've also found microscopic diamonds and glass spherules that could only have been formed by the extreme heat and pressure of a cosmic impact. The impact theory explains not just the climate change, but also the mass extinctions that occurred at the end of the Pleistocene epoch. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dozens of species that had survived multiple ice ages suddenly disappeared. The impact would have caused global wildfires, acid rain, and a nuclear winter, effect that lasted for years. But here's where Hapgood's theory becomes really interesting. If the impact was large enough to cause such global devastation, it might also have been powerful enough to alter the Earth's rotational balance. The redistribution of mass from the impact crater, combined with the sudden melting and freezing of ice sheets, could have caused the entire crust to shift position relative to the planet's axis. If Hapgood was right, then those ancient maps make perfect sense. They weren't drawn from imagination, they were drawn from memory, passed down through generations of survivors who remembered when Antarctica was green and warm and inhabited. The precision of these maps suggests that whoever drew the original sources had advanced knowledge of geography and navigation. They understood concepts like longitude and latitude. They had the ability to accurately measure distances and angles across vast oceanic expanses. This level of cartographic sophistication wasn't supposed to exist until the 18th century, yet the evidence suggests it existed thousands of years earlier. The modern history of Antarctica is filled with stories that don't quite add up, missions that ended strangely, and encounters that were quickly classified and forgotten. Let's start with one of the most intriguing. In December 1946, the United States launched Operation Highjump, officially described as a mission to establish research bases and test equipment in polar conditions. Admiral Richard Byrd led a massive fleet, 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and over 700 personnel. This was one of the largest Antarctic expeditions in history, involving more resources than most military operations during World War II. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. The fleet included the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, the submarine USS Senate, destroyers, icebreakers, and supply ships. The aircraft contingent included fighters, bombers, transport planes, and helicopters. This wasn't the kind of force you'd deploy for routine scientific research or equipment testing. The mission was supposed to last 6 to 8 months. The official objectives included mapping the coastline, establishing research stations, and testing military equipment in polar conditions. But many of the personnel involved later reported that they were preparing for something very different, something that resembled combat operations more than scientific research. Instead of the planned extended deployment, Operation Highjump ended abruptly after just 6 weeks. The official report blamed harsh weather conditions and equipment failures. But eyewitness accounts from military personnel told a very different story. They spoke of disc-shaped aircraft that emerged from the ice and sea, moving at incredible speeds and performing maneuvers that defied known physics. These craft allegedly attacked the expedition's aircraft and ships, forcing the Americans to retreat. Several planes were reportedly shot down by weapons that left no conventional damage. The aircraft simply fell from the sky as if their engines had been mysteriously disabled. Admiral Byrd himself, in a supposedly classified interview with a Chilean journalist, mentioned encounters with flying objects that could travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He spoke of aircraft that could outmaneuver anything in the American arsenal, piloted by beings who seemed to possess technology far in advance of anything on Earth. The interview, published in a Chilean newspaper, was quickly dismissed by American officials as a misinterpretation or fabrication, but Byrd's own diary entries, discovered decades later, contained references to the land beyond the pole and encounters with the masters of the aerial technology. Now, you might be tempted to dismiss these accounts as Cold War propaganda or misidentified natural phenomena. But Operation Highjump wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the beginning of a pattern of strange encounters that continues to this day. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, military personnel stationed in Antarctica reported regular sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena. Silver disks were seen skimming over mountain peaks at impossible speeds. Glowing objects emerged from beneath the ice and disappeared into the sky. Flight crews were routinely debriefed by intelligence officers and told never to speak of what they'd seen. These weren't isolated incidents reported by unreliable witnesses. These were trained military observers, pilots, navigators, radar operators, people whose job it was to accurately identify aircraft and assess threats. And they were all seeing the same things. The consistency of these reports is remarkable. Witnesses from different branches of the military, serving at different times and in different locations, described identical phenomena. Disc-shaped craft that moved silently through the air. Objects that could accelerate from hover to hypersonic speeds in seconds. Aircraft that seemed unaffected by Antarctic weather conditions that grounded conventional planes. What makes these reports particularly credible is that many of the witnesses had nothing to gain from speaking out. Military personnel who reported UFO sightings often faced ridicule, psychiatric evaluation, and career damage. The fact that they continued to report these incidents despite professional consequences suggests they were describing genuine experiences. Let me tell you about Dr. Sarah Chen, a glaciologist who was part of a National Science Foundation research team in the late 1990s. Dr. Chen had spent her entire career studying ice formations and climate patterns. She was methodical, skeptical, and not prone to flights of fancy. But what happened to her team in Antarctica challenged everything she thought she understood about the world. Dr. Chen and her colleagues were studying ice core samples near the Transantarctic Mountains when something extraordinary happened. Their camp was established in a remote valley, about 400 miles from McMurdo Base. The team of 8 scientists was scheduled to spend 3 weeks collecting samples and conducting atmospheric research. They had satellite communications, emergency beacons, and enough supplies for a month. The valley they'd chosen for their research was ideal for their purposes. It was sheltered from the worst Antarctic weather, had easy access to ice formations from multiple geological periods, and was far enough from other research activities to avoid contamination of their atmospheric measurements. For the first 11 days, everything proceeded normally. The team collected ice cores, conducted atmospheric readings, and transmitted regular status reports to McMurdo Base. Their research was yielding fascinating insights into climate patterns from thousands of years ago, preserved in the layers of ancient ice. On day 12 of their mission, McMurdo Base lost contact with the team. This wasn't entirely unusual. Solar storms and atmospheric conditions could disrupt communications for hours or even days. The camp's communication equipment was functioning normally when they checked in the previous evening, and there was no indication of any problems. But when contact wasn't re-established after 48 hours, a rescue mission was launched. A C-130 Hercules transport plane was dispatched with a full search and rescue crew, medical personnel, and emergency supplies. The rescue team found the camp exactly as it had been left. Tents were still standing, guy lines tight and stakes secure. Equipment was neatly arranged in the research area. Personal belongings were undisturbed in the sleeping quarters. Hot meals sat half-finished on camp tables, frozen but showing no signs of having been abandoned in panic. But there was no sign of the 8 scientists, no tracks leading away from camp, no evidence of a struggle or emergency evacuation, no indication that anyone had left the immediate area voluntarily or under duress. The rescue team conducted an extensive search of the surrounding area. They checked every crevasse within a 2-mile radius. They examined ice caves and rock formations where the scientists might have taken shelter. They used ground-penetrating radar to search for bodies that might have fallen through thin ice or been buried by snow. It was as if 8 people had simply vanished into thin air. The search continued for days, expanding in ever-widening circles. Helicopters were brought in from McMurdo Station. Ground teams checked every crevasse and ice cave within a 50-mile radius. Satellites were tasked to photograph the area, looking for any sign of the missing researchers. The search area covered over 2,000 square miles of some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Every potential shelter was investigated. Every possible route away from the camp was traced. Rescue teams worked around the clock, fighting exhaustion and brutal weather conditions. Then, 5 days after they disappeared, the scientists' emergency beacon suddenly activated. The signal was strong and clear, coming from a location about 2 miles from their original camp. Rescue helicopters were dispatched immediately. They were found huddled together in an ice cave about 2 miles from their original camp, all 8 of them alive but in a state of severe psychological distress. The cave wasn't one that had been formed naturally. It appeared to have been carved or excavated, with smooth walls and a level floor that showed signs of recent modification. The scientists were suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration, but their physical condition wasn't consistent with having been exposed to Antarctic conditions for 5 days. Their clothing wasn't damaged by prolonged exposure to wind and cold. They showed no signs of frostbite, or the kind of injuries you'd expect from someone who had been struggling to survive in the wilderness. More puzzling was their mental state. When questioned about what had happened, their stories were inconsistent and fragmented. Some claimed they'd been exploring a newly discovered cave system. Others insisted they'd never left their camp. Several had no memory of the past 5 days at all. Dr. Chen herself remembered walking toward a strange humming sound that seemed to come from beneath the ice, but couldn't recall anything after that until waking up in the cave. She described the sound as unlike anything she'd ever heard, not mechanical, but not natural either. It seemed to resonate through the ice itself, creating vibrations that she could feel in her bones. Other team members described similar experiences. They remembered being drawn away from camp by lights, sounds, or simply an overwhelming compulsion to walk in a particular direction. But none of them could remember what happened between leaving camp and waking up in the cave. All 8 scientists were evacuated immediately. Upon returning to the United States, they were extensively debriefed by officials who weren't affiliated with the National Science Foundation. Men in dark suits who asked detailed questions about their experiences and required them to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The scientists signed extensive non-disclosure agreements, and their research data was classified. The ice cores they'd collected, representing weeks of careful work, were seized and taken to an undisclosed location. Their notes, photographs, and atmospheric readings were all confiscated as well. Dr. Chen left the field of glaciology shortly after and now teaches high school earth science in Oregon. She's never spoken publicly about her experience in Antarctica, but those close to her say she still has nightmares about humming sounds and can't bear the sight of ice. The official report on the incident attributed the scientists' disappearance to disorientation caused by extreme weather conditions and altitude sickness. It suggested that the team had become confused and wandered away from camp, eventually taking shelter in a natural ice cave until rescue arrived. But the report failed to explain several crucial details. How had 8 experienced researchers, all equipped with GPS devices and emergency locators, become so disoriented that they left no tracks? Why had their emergency beacons not activated for 5 days? And how had they survived in an ice cave with no food, water, or heating equipment? Most importantly, the report didn't address the modifications to the cave where they were found. The smooth walls and level floor weren't natural formations. They showed clear signs of having been carved or excavated using advanced techniques. The cave was also significantly warmer than the surrounding environment, suggesting some kind of heating system that wasn't apparent to the rescue teams. The more we learn about Antarctica's subsurface, the more mysterious it becomes. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys have revealed a landscape beneath the ice that's far more complex than anyone imagined. There are vast lake systems, not frozen, but liquid water warmed by geothermal activity. Lake Vostok, discovered in the 1970s, is larger than Lake Ontario and has been isolated beneath the ice for millions of years. The lake is over 160 miles long and 30 miles wide, with depths exceeding 2,000 feet. It contains more than 300 cubic miles of liquid water, maintained at temperatures above freezing by geothermal heat from the Earth's core. When Russian scientists finally drilled down to sample the lake in 2012, they found something unexpected. The water contained microorganisms unlike anything found elsewhere on Earth. These organisms had evolved in complete isolation, developing unique biological processes that allowed them to thrive in an environment with no sunlight, extreme pressure, and limited nutrients. But the microorganisms weren't the most surprising discovery. Analysis of the water samples revealed traces of metals and minerals that don't occur naturally in the surrounding ice or bedrock. The water contained titanium alloys, rare earth elements, and isotopic signatures that suggested artificial origin. The Russian drilling project was suddenly halted after these discoveries were made. The borehole was sealed, and all research data was classified. Team members were required to sign non-disclosure agreements and were reassigned to different projects. The official explanation was that environmental concerns had prompted the suspension of the drilling operation. But lakes aren't the only things hidden beneath the ice. Satellite imagery and subsurface mapping have revealed geometric structures, shapes that appear artificial. Some look like massive pyramids. Others resemble complex geometric patterns that could be the remains of ancient cities. The most intriguing of these structures was discovered in 2009 by a team of geologists using advanced ground-penetrating radar, located about 200 miles inland from the Ross Ice Shelf. The structure appears to be a massive complex of interconnected chambers and corridors extending deep underground. Dr. James Morrison, the lead researcher, described it as architectural rather than geological. The angles are too precise, the symmetry too perfect for a natural formation. The complex appears to cover an area roughly the size of Manhattan and extends at least 2,000 feet below the surface. The radar signatures suggested that the structure was composed of materials denser than ice, but lighter than rock. The walls appeared to be uniform in thickness and composition, with regular spacing that resembled planned construction rather than natural geological processes. Most remarkably, the structure appeared to contain empty spaces, vast chambers that were not filled with ice, despite being buried for thousands of years. These spaces showed regular geometric shapes, perfect circles, rectangles and more complex polygonal configurations that suggested deliberate design. When Dr. Morrison's team submitted their findings for peer review, they encountered unexpected resistance. Funding for further research was mysteriously cut. The team was reassigned to different projects, and the data from their discovery was classified under the Antarctic Treaty's environmental protection protocols. The classification was particularly puzzling because environmental protocols typically apply to activities that might damage the Antarctic ecosystem, not to basic geological research. The fact that purely scientific data was deemed sensitive enough to classify suggested that the discovery had implications beyond academic geology. Dr. Morrison retired early and moved to a small cabin in Montana. He's declined all requests for interviews, but neighbors say he sometimes talks about cities that shouldn't exist and doors that were never meant to be opened. Since Dr. Morrison's discovery, similar structures have been identified using satellite imagery and advanced radar systems. A complex near the Ellsworth Mountains appears to contain a network of tunnels connecting multiple large chambers. Another site in Marie Byrd Land shows what looks like a series of interconnected buildings arranged in a precise geometric pattern. These structures share several common characteristics. They're all located well inland from the coast, buried under at least 1,000 feet of ice. They show evidence of artificial construction using materials and techniques that don't match known human capabilities from any historical period. And they all appear to contain empty spaces that have somehow remained unfrozen despite being buried in ice for thousands of years. The preservation of these empty spaces is particularly puzzling. Ice should flow into any cavity over time, especially under the immense pressure found at these depths. The fact that chambers and corridors remain open suggests either that they were created relatively recently or that some mechanism is actively preventing ice infiltration. Some researchers have suggested that geothermal activity could explain the preservation of these spaces. Underground heat sources could maintain temperatures above freezing, creating pockets of liquid water that would prevent ice accumulation. But the geometric regularity of the spaces argues against natural geothermal explanations. Former Navy communications specialist Michael Torres spent 2 winters at McMurdo Station in the early 2000s. His job was to maintain the base's radar and communications equipment, work that often kept him on duty during the long polar nights when most other personnel were asleep. McMurdo Station is the largest research facility in Antarctica, home to over 1,000 people during the summer months and about 200 during the harsh winter period. The base operates sophisticated radar systems for tracking aircraft and weather patterns, as well as communication arrays that link Antarctica to the outside world. Torres was responsible for monitoring these systems 24 hours a day during the winter, when the extreme cold and constant darkness made equipment failures more likely. It was solitary work, conducted in heated control rooms, while the Antarctic wind howled outside. It was during these quiet midnight hours that Torres began to notice something odd about the radar displays. Objects would appear at the edge of the screen, moving at speeds that conventional aircraft couldn't achieve. They would hover motionlessly for minutes at a time, then accelerate and disappear in seconds. The radar systems at McMurdo are military-grade equipment designed to track objects at extreme ranges with high precision. They're calibrated to distinguish between aircraft, weather phenomena, and false returns caused by atmospheric conditions. Torres had been trained to interpret these displays and understood their capabilities and limitations. At first, Torres assumed these were equipment malfunctions or atmospheric anomalies. Antarctica's unique conditions can play tricks on radar systems. The interaction between the Earth's magnetic field and charged particles from the Sun creates phenomena that can generate false radar returns. But the objects appeared too regularly and moved too purposefully to be mere glitches. Torres began keeping a log of these encounters, noting the time, duration, speed, and behavior of each object. Over the course of 18 months, he recorded over 200 incidents. The objects seemed to follow regular patterns, appearing most frequently during the darkest weeks of winter and often emerging from the same general directions. They would typically appear first as distant contacts at the edge of radar range, approaching at moderate speeds that gradually increase to impossible velocities. Most remarkably, the objects seemed to be aware of the radar surveillance. They would often change course when the radar beam swept over them, or would disappear entirely for several minutes before reappearing in a different location. This suggested not just advanced technology, but intelligence behind their operation. When Torres reported his observations to his supervisors, he was told that atmospheric conditions in Antarctica commonly caused false radar returns. He was advised to focus on his maintenance duties and not worry about anomalous readings. The dismissive response troubled Torres, especially since he knew his supervisors had access to the same radar logs and must have seen the same patterns he was documenting. Their apparent lack of concern suggested either that they were unaware of the significance of the sightings, or that they were deliberately ignoring them. But Torres wasn't the only one noticing strange things. Pilots flying supply runs reported seeing lights beneath the ice, not just the occasional glow from research stations, but coordinated patterns of illumination that seemed to stretch for miles underground. The lights would move in formation, appearing and disappearing in sequences that suggested organized activity. Ground crews working on the station's outer perimeter sometimes heard mechanical sounds coming from deep beneath their feet, humming, vibrating noises that seemed too regular to be natural geological processes. The sounds were most noticeable during the quiet hours of the polar night, when the usual activity of the base died down. These mechanical sounds had a distinctly artificial quality. They consisted of regular pulses, rhythmic vibrations, and harmonic frequencies that suggested machinery in operation. The sounds seemed to emanate from deep underground, transmitted through the ice and rock to the surface. Most personnel learned to ignore these phenomena. Those who asked too many questions were often transferred to other assignments or found their contracts unexpectedly terminated. A culture of deliberate ignorance developed, where everyone knew something was happening but no one talked about it. The unofficial policy seemed to be that unusual sightings and sounds were simply part of working in Antarctica, environmental anomalies that were interesting but not significant. Personnel were encouraged to focus on their assigned duties rather than investigating mysteries. Torres completed his assignment and returned to civilian life, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd witnessed something significant. He kept his radar logs and eventually reached out to UFO researchers, sharing his data under condition of anonymity. The patterns Torres documented match similar reports from dozens of other military personnel who've served in Antarctica over the past several decades. The consistency of these accounts is remarkable. The same types of objects, the same flight patterns, the same official responses encouraging witnesses to remain silent. Analysis of Torres's radar data by independent researchers revealed sophisticated flight characteristics that exceed known human technology. The objects demonstrated instantaneous acceleration, right-angle turns at high speed, and the ability to hover motionlessly in high wind conditions that would ground conventional aircraft. Most significantly, the data showed evidence of coordinated group behavior. Multiple objects would often appear simultaneously, moving in formation and apparently communicating with each other. They would execute complex maneuvers that required precise timing and coordination. This suggests not just advanced individual craft, but an organized presence with sophisticated command and control capabilities. The objects weren't random visitors, they were part of a systematic operation that has been ongoing for decades. In 2007, a team of archaeologists working under a joint international research grant made a discovery that would challenge everything we thought we knew about Antarctica's history. Dr. Elena Vasquez and her colleagues were investigating exposed rock formations in the Dry Valleys region when they found something that shouldn't have existed. The Dry Valleys are one of the most Mars-like environments on Earth, a region where katabatic winds sweep down from the polar plateau with such force that they prevent snow accumulation. The valleys are ice-free, exposing ancient rock formations that are normally hidden beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. Dr. Vasquez's team was conducting a routine geological survey, documenting rock types and formations that could provide insights into Antarctica's ancient climate. They were using ground-penetrating radar to map surface structures when they detected an anomaly in one of the valley walls. Carved into the rock face was a series of symbols, clearly artificial, obviously ancient, but unlike any known writing system. The symbols were arranged in precise geometric patterns and appeared to have been created using advanced cutting tools. The edges were clean and sharp, with no evidence of weathering that should have occurred over thousands of years of exposure. The symbols themselves were complex, consisting of interlocking geometric shapes, curved lines, and patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles. Some resembled astronomical charts, with circular configurations that could represent planetary orbits or stellar positions. Others looked like technical diagrams, with precise angles and measurements that suggested engineering applications. Carbon dating of organic material found in the carved grooves suggested the symbols were at least 8,000 years old. But the preservation was remarkable. The symbols looked as if they could have been carved yesterday, with crisp edges and clear details that shouldn't have survived millennia of Antarctic weather. But that wasn't the most remarkable discovery. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team detected a large chamber beneath the rock face. The chamber appeared to be artificial, too regular in shape to be a natural cave formation. The radar showed a circular space, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with walls that appeared to be smooth and uniform. The chamber was located about 20 feet below the surface, accessed through what appeared to be a narrow tunnel system that connected to the symbols on the rock face. When they finally gained access to the chamber through a narrow opening, they found themselves in a circular room about 30 feet in diameter. The walls were smooth and appeared to have been carved from solid rock using techniques that left no tool marks. The surface was polished to a mirror finish that reflected their flashlight beams with crystal clarity. But most intriguing were the objects they found inside. There were several crystalline structures that seemed to generate their own light, though no power source was apparent. The crystals were perfectly clear, with internal structures that created complex patterns of refraction. When exposed to artificial light, they would glow with a soft, steady illumination that persisted for hours after the external light source was removed. Metal objects that were lighter than aluminum but stronger than steel, composed of elements that didn't match anything in the periodic table. These artifacts had a distinctive appearance. They seemed to shimmer with an internal light, and their surfaces felt warm to the touch despite the cold environment. Spectral analysis of these metal objects revealed isotopic signatures that didn't match terrestrial materials. The atomic structure suggested elements that were either synthetic or originated from outside the solar system. The metals showed no signs of corrosion or degradation despite their apparent age, and in the center of the chamber, a device that Dr. Vasquez described as something between a computer terminal and a sculpture. The device consisted of a series of interlocking metallic rings suspended around a central crystal core. The rings appeared to be made of the same unusual metal as the other artifacts, but they moved independently of each other, rotating slowly in complex patterns that seemed to follow some internal logic. When team members approached, the rings would slowly rotate and the crystal would emit a soft, pulsing light. The light wasn't random. It followed patterns that seemed to respond to the presence and movement of observers. Different people would trigger different light sequences, as if the device was somehow reading and responding to individual characteristics. Touching the crystal seemed to activate some kind of interface. Symbols would appear in the air above the device, rotating and shifting in three-dimensional patterns. The symbols matched those carved on the rock face outside, but they moved and combined in ways that suggested they were components of a complex information system. The holographic displays were unlike anything in known human technology. The images were solid-looking but immaterial, visible from all angles but impossible to touch or manipulate directly. The symbols would form, dissolve, and reform in sequences that seemed to follow grammatical or mathematical rules. Dr. Vasquez and her team spent days documenting the chamber and its contents. They took thousands of photographs and video recordings, carefully measuring and mapping every detail. The implications of their discovery were staggering, evidence of advanced technology that predated known human civilization by thousands of years. But when they attempted to remove some of the artifacts for further study, their excavation was suddenly shut down. Officials from multiple government agencies arrived at the site within hours of the team's discovery being reported. The shutdown was swift and comprehensive. The chamber was sealed with concrete. The entrance tunnel was filled with rubble. The entire site was declared off limits for safety reasons, though no specific hazards were identified. All research materials were confiscated. Team members were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements and were prohibited from discussing their findings. The official report stated that the site had been found to contain hazardous materials and was closed for safety reasons. Dr. Vasquez returned to her position at the University of Barcelona, but colleagues noticed a change in her. She became withdrawn, often staring into space as if trying to remember something important. She would sometimes sketch strange symbols in the margins of her lecture notes, symbols that matched those found in the Antarctic chamber. Her research focus shifted dramatically. Instead of conventional archaeology, she became obsessed with ancient astronomical knowledge and advanced prehistoric technologies. She would spend hours in the university library, researching ancient civilizations that supposedly possessed scientific knowledge beyond their time. In 2010, Dr. Vasquez disappeared while hiking alone in the Pyrenees. Her body was never found, though search teams discovered her notebook near a remote mountain lake. The notebook was filled with detailed drawings of crystalline structures and rotating metallic rings, accompanied by notes written in a script that linguists couldn't identify. The script bore similarities to the symbols found in the Antarctic chamber, but it appeared to be more advanced, as if Dr. Vasquez had somehow learned to read and write in the ancient language during the years following her discovery. Her disappearance remains unsolved, but some researchers believe she may have made contact with the same intelligence that created the Antarctic artifacts. Her final notes suggest she was searching for additional sites where similar technologies might be hidden. Perhaps the most unsettling accounts from Antarctica come from personnel who've worked in the continent's most remote and classified locations. These are stories that emerge years after the fact, told by individuals who finally decided to break their silence despite legal and professional consequences. Commander Robert Hayes spent 15 years in the Navy before being assigned to a classified project in Antarctica in 2004. His security clearance was upgraded to levels he didn't even know existed, and he was required to undergo psychological evaluation before deployment. The psychological evaluation was extensive, lasting several days and conducted by specialists who seemed more interested in his willingness to follow orders than his mental stability. They asked detailed questions about his family connections, political beliefs, and religious convictions. Most concerning were questions about his willingness to keep secrets that might conflict with his personal ethics. Hayes and his team were transported to a location he describes as being somewhere near the geographic South Pole, though he was never given exact coordinates. Their destination was a facility that didn't appear on any maps, a complex of buildings and installations that seemed to have been there for decades despite Antarctica's harsh conditions. The facility was much larger than it appeared from the surface. Most of the complex extended deep underground, connected by a network of tunnels that had been carved through solid ice and rock. The tunnels were surprisingly warm, heated by geothermal systems that tapped into underground hot springs. The construction techniques used in the facility were unlike anything Hayes had seen in conventional military installations. The walls appeared to be made from a material that was harder than concrete but lighter than metal. The surfaces had a slight luminescent quality that provided ambient lighting without any visible light sources. Hayes's job was to provide security for scientific personnel who were conducting research in the facility's deepest levels. He was told that the scientists were studying geological formations and conducting climate research, but what he observed suggested something entirely different. The research teams would descend to levels that were hundreds of feet below the surface, sometimes staying underground for days at a time. They would return looking haggard and disturbed, carrying sealed containers filled with materials that Hayes wasn't allowed to examine. The containers were made from the same unusual material as the facility walls, with seamless construction that showed no evidence of how they were manufactured. They were surprisingly light for their size, and they seemed to maintain a constant internal temperature regardless of external conditions. Some of the scientists would emerge from the deep levels speaking in hushed tones about contact protocols and communication attempts. They would discuss procedures for interacting with research subjects, using language that sounded more like diplomatic negotiations than scientific study. But it wasn't just the scientists' behavior that troubled Hayes. During his 6-month assignment, he became aware that the facility wasn't alone in the area. There were other installations, structures that were clearly not human in origin. These other facilities could be reached through the tunnel system, though access required special authorization that was rarely granted. Hayes only visited them twice, escorting scientific teams who were conducting what they called diplomatic missions. What he saw during these visits challenged his understanding of reality. The non-human facilities were constructed from materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, yet were solid to the touch. The architecture followed geometric principles that hurt to look at, directly angles that seemed to fold in on themselves, corridors that appeared to extend infinitely in both directions. The construction seemed to defy basic physics. Walls that looked vertical from one angle appeared horizontal from another. Rooms that seemed small from the outside contained vast spaces inside. The entire structure seemed to exist in more dimensions than the three Hayes was familiar with, and there were inhabitants. Hayes describes them as roughly humanoid, but clearly not human, tall, pale beings with elongated limbs and features that seemed more adapted to cold environments than surface-dwelling. The beings stood approximately 7 feet tall, with thin builds and limbs that were proportionally longer than human anatomy. Their skin had a translucent quality that revealed underlying structures that didn't quite match human physiology. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, with pupils that seemed to adjust independently to different light conditions. These beings communicated through a combination of telepathic projection and complex hand gestures. The telepathic communication wasn't like science fiction portrayals. It was more like suddenly understanding concepts without hearing words, as if information was being directly transferred to his consciousness. The hand gestures were equally complex, involving movements of fingers and wrists in patterns that seemed to convey detailed information. The gestures appeared to be a complete language system with grammar and syntax that allowed for sophisticated communication. The most unsettling aspect of these encounters was the beings' apparent familiarity with human visitors. They seemed to expect the diplomatic teams had prepared materials for exchange and demonstrated knowledge of human technology and culture that shouldn't have been possible. The materials they provided during these exchanges were unlike anything Hayes had seen. Crystalline matrices that stored information in ways that human computers couldn't access. Metal alloys that changed properties based on environmental conditions. Devices that seemed to manipulate energy in ways that violated known physics. In return, the human teams provided their own materials, samples of human technology, biological specimens, and information storage devices containing data about human civilization. The exchanges followed protocols that suggested they had been ongoing for years, possibly decades. Hayes completed his assignment and returned to conventional Navy duties, but he was required to undergo monthly psychological evaluations for the next 3 years. The evaluations focused on his ability to maintain operational security and his psychological adjustment to classified experiences. He was also monitored by security personnel who would appear at his duty stations to remind him of his obligations under the Espionage Act. These reminders were subtle but clear. Any attempt to discuss his Antarctic experiences would result in prosecution and imprisonment. After retiring from the Navy in 2015, Hayes moved to a remote ranch in Wyoming where he raises cattle and tries to forget what he experienced in Antarctica. But sometimes, on clear winter nights, he finds himself staring at the southern sky and wondering what agreements were being negotiated in those underground chambers. His account is supported by similar stories from other military personnel who've served in classified Antarctic operations. The consistency of these reports, the descriptions of non-human beings, advanced technology and ongoing diplomatic contact suggest that Hayes's experience wasn't unique. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, is often praised as one of humanity's greatest diplomatic achievements. It designated Antarctica as a continent devoted to peaceful scientific research, banned military activities, and prohibited nuclear testing. But critics suggest that the treaty serves another purpose. It provides legal cover for activities that the signing nations don't want public scrutiny. The treaty was negotiated during the height of the Cold War, at a time when the United States and Soviet Union were competing for global influence. The fact that these adversaries could agree on Antarctic governance suggests that they had compelling reasons to cooperate, reasons that went beyond scientific research or environmental protection. Article IV of the treaty is particularly interesting. It states that no activities taking place during the life of the treaty shall constitute a basis for asserting, supporting, or denying a claim to territorial sovereignty in Antarctica. In other words, anything discovered in Antarctica, any resources, any structures, any evidence of past or present civilizations, cannot be claimed by any single nation. This might seem like enlightened international cooperation, but it also means that discoveries in Antarctica can be managed collectively by the treaty signatories without public oversight or accountability. If something significant were found beneath the ice, ancient ruins, advanced technology, or evidence of non-human intelligence, the treaty provides a framework for keeping such discoveries classified indefinitely. The treaty also establishes strict controls over who can visit Antarctica and where they can go. While tourists can visit certain designated areas, the vast majority of the continent remains off limits to civilian exploration. No-fly zones cover thousands of square miles, ostensibly to protect wildlife, but effectively preventing independent investigation of anomalous sites. These no-fly zones are particularly significant because they cover areas where unusual phenomena have been most frequently reported. The restrictions are enforced by military aircraft from treaty signatory nations, which maintain a constant presence in Antarctic airspace despite the treaty's prohibition on military activities. Dr. Patricia Knowles, a former State Department official who worked on Antarctic policy in the 1980s and 90s, has suggested that the treaty serves as a cover for what she calls the most successful international secret-keeping operation in history. Knowles had top-secret clearance and was involved in high-level diplomatic negotiations regarding Antarctic activities. Her position gave her access to classified documents and briefings that revealed the true scope of international cooperation in Antarctica. According to Dr. Knowles, representatives of the 12 original treaty signatories meet annually in closed sessions to coordinate their Antarctic activities. These meetings go far beyond the scientific cooperation that's publicly acknowledged. They involve intelligence sharing, technology transfers, and joint operations that are never reported to their respective governments' civilian leadership. The meetings take place in secure facilities in different countries each year, with locations chosen for their isolation and security capabilities. Attendance is limited to individuals with the highest security clearances, and all proceedings are classified at levels that prevent disclosure for decades. Knowles claims that these operations include archaeological projects that have uncovered evidence of advanced pre-human civilizations, as well as ongoing contact with non-human intelligence that has been present in Antarctica for thousands of years. The archaeological projects, according to Dr. Knowles, have revealed structures and artifacts that predate known human civilization by tens of thousands of years. The technology represented by these artifacts is so advanced that it's being reverse-engineered by teams of scientists from all treaty signatory nations. The reverse engineering efforts have led to technological breakthroughs that have been gradually introduced into civilian applications without revealing their true origin. Computer technology, materials science, and energy production have all benefited from insights gained from Antarctic discoveries. But perhaps more significantly, Dr. Knowles claims that the treaty signatories have established formal diplomatic contact with non-human entities that inhabit underground facilities beneath the Antarctic ice. These contacts began in the 1950s and have continued under a series of agreements that govern the interaction between human and non-human civilizations. The evidence for these claims, she says, is contained in classified files that are shared among treaty signatories but kept secret from their own citizens. The classification levels are so high that even senior government officials in the signatory countries are unaware of the true scope of Antarctic activities. When Dr. Knowles attempted to release some of this information in 2003, her security clearance was revoked and she was threatened with prosecution under the Espionage Act. She was also subjected to intensive surveillance and harassment that continued for several years. She now lives in Canada under an assumed identity and continues to advocate for public disclosure of what she calls the Antarctic truth. Her efforts have been supported by other former government officials who've had similar experiences after attempting to reveal classified Antarctic information. The consistency of these accounts from individuals in different countries and government agencies suggests that the Antarctic Treaty may indeed be serving purposes far beyond its public mandate. The level of secrecy and the severe consequences faced by potential whistleblowers indicate that something significant is being hidden from public view. Even with all the secrecy and restrictions surrounding Antarctica, reports of anomalous phenomena continue to emerge. Modern technology makes it increasingly difficult to suppress all evidence of unusual activities, though efforts to do so continue. In 2016, several commercial pilots flying routes over the Southern Ocean reported seeing massive objects emerging from the ice near the Antarctic Peninsula. The sightings occurred during flights between South America and Australia, along routes that pass relatively close to Antarctic airspace. The objects were described as metallic and disc-shaped, measuring several hundred feet in diameter. They would rise from beneath the ice, hover motionlessly for several minutes, then accelerate upward and disappear. The objects moved without any visible propulsion system and made no sound that could be detected over the aircraft engines. Captain Maria Rodriguez, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience flying international routes, described her encounter in detail. She was piloting a passenger flight from Santiago to Sydney when her co-pilot noticed unusual activity on the horizon. "We saw what looked like 3 large discs rising from the ice," Rodriguez reported. "They were perfectly smooth and reflective, like mirrors. They hovered about 1,000 feet above the surface for maybe 5 minutes, then shot straight up and disappeared." The objects were also visible to passengers, many of whom took photographs and videos with their phones. The images clearly showed structured craft that didn't resemble any known aircraft or natural phenomena. These sightings were corroborated by passenger videos posted on social media, though the videos were quickly removed by the hosting platforms for violating community standards. The pilots who made the initial reports found themselves subjected to random drug testing and psychiatric evaluations by their airlines. Rodriguez and several other pilots were required to undergo comprehensive medical and psychological examinations. Their flight records were reviewed, and they were questioned extensively about their mental health, medication use, and personal problems that might affect their judgment. The airline industry's response suggested that such sightings weren't unprecedented. The evaluation protocols seemed well established, as if procedures already existed for handling pilot reports of unusual phenomena. Similar incidents have been reported by crews of research vessels and cargo ships traveling in Antarctic waters. In 2018, the crew of a Chilean supply ship captured video footage of what appeared to be a structured craft moving beneath the ocean surface near the South Shetland Islands. The object was estimated to be over 300 feet long and moved at speeds that no known submarine could achieve. It maintained a constant depth about 50 feet below the surface, creating a visible wake despite being completely submerged. Captain George Mendez of the supply vessel Alme Almirant Veal described the encounter. "Wu tracked this object for over an hour. It moved in straight lines, made perfect 90-degree turns, and maintained speeds of at least 60 knots underwater. No submarine can do that." The Chilean Navy initially released the footage but retracted it within hours, claiming it showed only ice formations and optical illusions. However, copies of the video had already been distributed to UFO research organizations and continue to circulate despite efforts to suppress them. Analysis of the video by independent researchers confirmed that the object exhibited characteristics incompatible with known marine technology. The wake patterns, speed, and maneuverability all suggested technology far in advance of human submarines. Perhaps most intriguingly, satellite imagery has revealed the appearance of new structures on the Antarctic surface, geometric patterns and constructions that weren't there in previous years. These structures appear suddenly and seem to be built using construction techniques that leave no evidence of how they were assembled. Google Earth and other mapping services routinely blur or pixelate these areas in their public imagery, but high-resolution satellite photos obtained through government transparency requests have revealed clear evidence of ongoing construction activity in supposedly unpopulated regions of Antarctica. The construction appears to be collaborative, involving personnel and equipment from multiple treaty signatory nations. The structures being built are clearly not research stations or weather monitoring equipment. They're massive installations that seem designed for purposes that aren't acknowledged in any public documents. One particularly intriguing site, located about 400 miles inland from McMurdo Station, shows what appears to be a large circular structure approximately 2,000 feet in diameter. The structure consists of concentric rings connected by radial spokes, creating a pattern that resembles a giant wheel or mandala. The construction materials appear to be metallic, with a highly reflective surface that creates distinctive radar signatures. The structure wasn't present in satellite imagery from 2010, but appears fully constructed in images from 2015, suggesting it was built in less than 5 years. The rapid construction timeline is puzzling because the location is extremely remote and inaccessible during most of the year. Transporting materials and personnel to build such a massive structure would require a logistics operation on the scale of a major military deployment. Yet there's no evidence of the supply flights, base camps, or support infrastructure that such an operation would require. The structure seems to have appeared without any of the preparatory activities that would normally be associated with major construction projects. Climate change is affecting Antarctica in ways that extend far beyond rising sea levels and melting ice sheets. As the ice retreats, it's revealing things that have been hidden for thousands of years, and some researchers suggest that these revelations are accelerating in ways that worry government officials worldwide. Dr. Amanda Foster is a climatologist who has spent the last decade studying ice core samples from various Antarctic locations. Her research focuses on understanding historical climate patterns, but she's discovered something in the ice cores that has implications far beyond meteorology. Embedded in ice layers dating back approximately 12,000 years, Dr. Foster has found microscopic artifacts that appear to be artificial, tiny geometric structures composed of materials that don't occur naturally on Earth. These artifacts are distributed throughout ice cores from multiple locations, suggesting they were deposited across the entire continent during a specific time period. The artifacts are incredibly small, most measure less than a micrometer in diameter, but their geometric precision is remarkable. Under electron microscopy, they reveal complex internal structures that follow mathematical patterns found in advanced engineering applications. When subjected to spectral analysis, the artifacts emit energy signatures that match no known natural phenomena. They seem to resonate with electromagnetic frequencies in ways that suggest they might be some kind of technology, though their purpose remains unclear. The artifacts respond to various forms of energy input, including radio waves, magnetic fields, and coherent light. When stimulated, they produce harmonic frequencies that suggest they might be components of a larger technological system. Dr. Foster's attempts to publish her findings have been blocked by peer review processes that cite insufficient data and unsubstantiated claims. When she persisted in trying to bring her research to public attention, her funding was cut and her laboratory access was restricted. She was told that her research had been reclassified as potentially sensitive and that further work would require security clearances that she wasn't eligible to obtain. Her ice core samples were confiscated and transferred to a classified research facility. But Dr. Foster isn't the only researcher finding evidence that Antarctica is more than it appears. Teams studying the continent's geological structure have discovered vast networks of caves and tunnels that show signs of artificial modification. Some of these spaces are large enough to house entire cities and are maintained at temperatures that would support human habitation. The caves are connected by tunnel systems that extend for hundreds of miles beneath the ice sheet, creating a vast underground network. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have also revealed what appear to be massive machines buried deep beneath the ice, structures so large that they can only be partially mapped. These machines seem to be inactive, but they're constructed from materials that show no signs of degradation despite being buried for thousands of years. The machines appear to be integrated with the natural geothermal systems beneath Antarctica, suggesting they might be designed to harness or control underground heat sources. Their positioning seems deliberate, located at points where they could access multiple geothermal vents and underground water systems. Most concerning to some researchers is evidence that these buried systems might be reactivating. Seismographs have detected regular, rhythmic vibrations coming from deep beneath the ice, patterns that suggest machinery starting up after long periods of dormancy. The vibrations follow complex patterns that seem to indicate coordinated activity across multiple locations. When one system activates, others respond in sequence, suggesting a network of interconnected machinery that operates according to some overarching program. The frequency of these underground vibrations has increased dramatically over the past decade, coinciding with the acceleration of Antarctic ice melting. Some researchers speculate that the systems were designed to activate when surface conditions changed, possibly as some kind of fail-safe mechanism left behind by whoever built them. The correlation between surface warming and underground activity is too consistent to be coincidental. As temperatures rise and ice sheets thin, the vibrations become more frequent and intense, as if the buried systems are responding to environmental changes. This has led some researchers to propose that Antarctica's ice sheet might not be a natural formation, but an artificial preservation system designed to protect something underneath. The accelerating melt could represent the deactivation of this preservation system, leading to the exposure of whatever has been hidden beneath. If this theory is correct, then climate change isn't just threatening to raise sea levels, it's threatening to reveal secrets that have been hidden for thousands of years. The implications of such revelations could be far more significant than the environmental consequences of melting ice. One of the most compelling aspects of the Antarctic mystery is not what people are saying, but what they're not saying. The number of individuals who've had unusual experiences in Antarctica but remain silent is staggering, and their silence itself tells a story. Dr. Margaret Wells worked as a psychiatrist for the National Science Foundation from 1995 to 2010, providing mental health support for personnel stationed at various Antarctic research facilities. During her tenure, she counseled dozens of individuals who reported experiences that couldn't be easily explained. According to Dr. Wells, a significant percentage of personnel who spent extended time in Antarctica's more remote locations would return with symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress disorder. They would describe dreams about underground cities, encounters with beings that weren't quite human, and visions of vast machines buried beneath the ice. The symptoms were remarkably consistent across different individuals who had no contact with each other during their Antarctic deployments. They would report similar nightmares involving geometric structures, humming sounds that seemed to come from underground, and feelings of being watched or monitored while working in remote locations. What made these cases particularly interesting to Dr. Wells was the consistency of the reports. People from different backgrounds, different expeditions, and different time periods would describe remarkably similar experiences. The level of detail and the emotional responses were consistent with genuine trauma rather than fabricated stories. Yet, when she attempted to document these patterns for research purposes, she was instructed to classify the reports and cease any systematic analysis. She was told that the symptoms were simply manifestations of isolation stress and Antarctic-related psychological conditions. Wells was provided with standardized treatment protocols that focused on medication and counseling aimed at helping patients distinguish between reality and hallucination. The protocols seemed designed to suppress memory and discourage further discussion rather than help patients process their experiences. But Dr. Wells noticed something troubling about these standard treatments. They seemed designed not to help patients process their experiences, but to suppress memory and discourage further discussion. Patients who underwent the full treatment protocol often reported feeling foggy and had difficulty remembering details of their Antarctic experiences. The medications prescribed were primarily antipsychotics and memory-affecting drugs that would interfere with the formation and retrieval of memories. The counseling techniques focused on convincing patients that their experiences were hallucinations rather than exploring the content or meaning of their reports. When Dr. Wells raised concerns about these treatment methods, she was reassigned to domestic duties and eventually encouraged to take early retirement. She was told that her questioning of established protocols indicated a lack of professional judgment that made her unsuitable for sensitive assignments. She now works in private practice in Vermont, treating clients with various anxiety disorders, but she's never forgotten her Antarctic experiences. She estimates that during her 15 years of providing mental health services to Antarctic personnel, she encountered over 200 individuals who reported anomalous experiences. According to Dr. Wells, the psychological profiles of Antarctic personnel suggest that many more people have encountered unusual phenomena than have ever come forward publicly. The culture of secrecy and the legal consequences of disclosure create powerful incentives for witnesses to remain silent, even decades after their experiences. She estimates that for every person who has publicly shared an unusual Antarctic experience, there are probably 50 others who have had similar encounters but chosen to remain quiet. This suggests that the scope of anomalous activity in Antarctica is far greater than what's been acknowledged publicly. The silence is maintained through multiple mechanisms. Legal non-disclosure agreements prevent many witnesses from speaking publicly about their experiences. Career consequences discourage others from coming forward, and the psychological treatment protocols seem designed to make witnesses doubt the reality of their own experiences. But perhaps most effectively, the silence is maintained through social pressure and cultural conditioning. Personnel who work in Antarctica are taught to view unusual experiences as normal aspects of working in an extreme environment, nothing more than interesting anomalies that don't warrant serious attention. This normalization of the anomalous creates a culture where extraordinary experiences become routine, and routine experiences become unremarkable. Witnesses learn to dismiss their own observations and experiences as unimportant, even when those experiences suggest something significant is happening. Wells believes that this systematic suppression of witness testimony represents one of the most successful information control operations in history. The combination of legal, professional, psychological, and social pressures creates multiple layers of silence that are extremely difficult to penetrate. But the silence may not be sustainable indefinitely. As more people work in Antarctica and technology makes it harder to suppress information completely, the accumulated weight of witness testimony may eventually reach a tipping point where disclosure becomes inevitable. As we near the end of our journey through Antarctica's mysteries, it's worth considering what all of these accounts might mean when taken together. Individual stories can be dismissed as misidentification, hallucination, or fabrication, but the sheer volume of consistent reports from credible witnesses suggests something more significant is happening. The pattern that emerges from decades of testimony is one of a continent that serves as more than just a frozen wilderness. Antarctica appears to be a place where human and non-human intelligences have been interacting for far longer than mainstream history acknowledges. The evidence suggests that advanced civilizations existed on Antarctica during its warmer periods, possibly as recently as 12,000 years ago. These civilizations may have possessed technologies that we're only beginning to understand, technologies that were preserved beneath the ice when catastrophic climate change forced the continent into its current frozen state. The ancient maps showing Antarctica ice-free, the geometric structures detected beneath the ice, and the artifacts found in buried chambers all point to the existence of sophisticated cultures that thrived on the continent during its temperate period. The level of technology suggested by these discoveries exceeds what conventional archaeology attributes to human civilizations of that era. But perhaps more significantly, the evidence suggests that some form of intelligence survived Antarctica's transformation into a polar wasteland. Whether this represents descendants of ancient human civilizations, non-human beings who were already present on the continent, or visitors from elsewhere, the accounts consistently describe ongoing activity beneath the ice. The modern encounters reported by military personnel, the structured craft seen emerging from the ice, and the diplomatic missions described by classified program participants all suggest that contact between human and non-human intelligence has been ongoing for decades, if not centuries. The modern history of Antarctic exploration supports this interpretation. Rather than being motivated purely by scientific curiosity, major expeditions to Antarctica seem to have been driven by knowledge that something important was located there. The military nature of many early expeditions, the immediate classification of significant discoveries, and the establishment of international treaty controls all suggest that governments have been aware of Antarctica's secrets for decades. Operation High Jump, the classified facilities described by military witnesses, and the international cooperation mandated by the Antarctic Treaty all indicate that official interest in Antarctica goes far beyond scientific research or environmental protection. The level of security, secrecy, and international coordination suggests that something of enormous importance is being managed there. The Antarctic Treaty itself may represent humanity's first formal agreement governing contact with non-human intelligence. The treaty's provisions for shared governance, restricted access, and indefinite secrecy would make perfect sense if the signatory nations were managing a situation that required careful coordination and control. The prohibition on military activities, combined with the obvious military presence needed to enforce the treaty's restrictions, suggests that the demilitarization of Antarctica is actually a form of internationalized militarization designed to manage access to sensitive sites and activities. This interpretation would also explain why Antarctica remains off limits to independent exploration despite technological advances that would make such exploration feasible. If the continent hosts ongoing contact between human and non-human civilizations, maintaining control over access would be essential for managing the relationship and preventing public disclosure before humanity is prepared for such revelations. The gradual revelation of Antarctic anomalies through satellite imagery, witness testimony, and scientific discoveries may represent a controlled disclosure process designed to prepare humanity for eventual open contact. The increasing frequency of sightings and the growing body of evidence may be part of a long-term plan to gradually acclimate the public to the reality of non-human intelligence. Alternatively, the increasing evidence may represent the breakdown of secrecy protocols due to technological advances and changing geopolitical conditions. Climate change, commercial satellite imagery, and social media may be making it impossible to maintain the level of secrecy that has characterized Antarctic operations for the past several decades. If even a fraction of the Antarctic accounts we've discussed are accurate, the implications for our understanding of human history and our place in the universe are profound. Antarctica may represent evidence that Earth has been visited by non-human intelligence for thousands of years, and that some form of contact or cooperation has been ongoing throughout recorded history. The possibility that advanced civilizations existed on Earth much earlier than conventional archaeology acknowledges would require us to completely reconsider human development and capabilities. Technologies that we consider cutting edge might actually be rediscoveries of knowledge that was once common but was lost during global catastrophes. The Younger Dryas impact event, if it occurred as some researchers suggest, may have destroyed advanced human civilizations that existed during the late Pleistocene period. The survivors of such a catastrophe might have preserved some of their knowledge, passing it down through oral traditions and encoded symbols until it could be rediscovered by later civilizations. This would explain the apparent technological sophistication of some ancient cultures, as well as the recurring themes of lost golden ages and fallen civilizations that appear in mythologies around the world. The story of Atlantis, the biblical account of the Nephilim, and similar legends from various cultures may be cultural memories of real advanced civilizations that existed before recorded history. The prospect of ongoing contact with non-human intelligence raises even more complex questions. If such contact exists and is being managed by government agencies, what agreements have been made? What technologies or knowledge are being exchanged? And why has this information been kept secret from the public? The secrecy might be justified by concerns about social and economic disruption that could result from public disclosure of non-human intelligence. The revelation that humanity is not alone in the universe and that other intelligences possess vastly superior technology could undermine existing power structures and belief systems. Religious institutions might struggle to maintain relevance if confronted with evidence of multiple intelligent species and advanced technologies that exceed human capabilities. Economic systems based on scarcity and resource competition might become obsolete if non-human intelligences possess technologies for abundant energy and material production. Political systems based on national sovereignty and territorial control might become irrelevant if non-human intelligences operate according to different principles of organization and governance. The existing international order might collapse if humanity were forced to accept a subordinate position in a larger cosmic community. These concerns might explain why disclosure has been managed so carefully, with information released gradually through unofficial channels, rather than through official government announcements. The goal might be to slowly prepare humanity for eventual open contact by conditioning the public to accept the possibility of non-human intelligence. But secrecy also creates its own problems. The classification of scientific discoveries prevents the broader scientific community from participating in research that could benefit all humanity. The suppression of witness testimony prevents society from making informed decisions about how to respond to non-human contact. Perhaps most importantly, secrecy prevents humanity from developing ethical frameworks for interacting with non-human intelligence. If contact is already ongoing, then decisions about humanity's future relationship with other intelligences are being made by a small group of government and military officials without public input or oversight. These questions become more urgent as climate change accelerates the melting of Antarctic ice. Whatever has been preserved beneath the ice for thousands of years may soon be exposed naturally, making it increasingly difficult to maintain secrecy about Antarctica's mysteries. As we conclude our exploration of Antarctica's secrets, it's worth remembering that this vast continent still holds most of its mysteries close. We've only scratched the surface, literally and figuratively, of what lies beneath the ice. The witnesses whose accounts we've shared represent just a tiny fraction of the people who have experienced something unusual in Antarctica. For every story that has been told publicly, there are dozens more that remain locked away in classified files or buried in the memories of individuals who have chosen silence over disclosure. But silence is becoming harder to maintain. Modern technology makes it increasingly difficult to suppress information completely. Satellite imagery reveals structures and activities that can't be easily explained away. Social media provides platforms for witnesses to share their experiences despite official discouragement. Independent researchers are using commercial satellite data, leaked documents, and whistleblower testimony to piece together evidence of activities that official sources continue to deny. The democratization of information technology is gradually eroding the information monopoly that has allowed Antarctic secrets to be maintained for decades. The generation of witnesses who experienced Antarctica's mysteries during the Cold War era is aging, and some are deciding that their oath of secrecy matters less than the public's right to know. Former military personnel, scientists, and government officials are coming forward with accounts that corroborate and extend the stories we've discussed. Climate change is also forcing the issue. As temperatures rise and ice melts, things that have been hidden for millennia are being exposed. Archaeological artifacts, ancient structures, and possibly even preserved beings are emerging from the ice, creating evidence that will be impossible to explain away or suppress. The rate of ice loss in Antarctica has accelerated dramatically over the past 2 decades. Satellite measurements show that the continent is losing ice mass at an unprecedented rate, with some projections suggesting that significant portions of the ice sheet could disappear within this century. As the ice retreats, it's revealing landscapes that haven't been exposed for thousands of years. Ancient valleys, mountain ranges, and geological formations are becoming visible for the first time in recorded history, and with them, potentially evidence of the civilizations and technologies that once existed on the continent. Perhaps most significantly, there are signs that whatever intelligence has been present in Antarctica may be preparing for more open contact. The increase in sightings, the appearance of new surface structures, and reports of expanded underground activity all suggest that the era of secrecy may be coming to an end. The correlation between accelerating ice loss and increasing anomalous activity may not be coincidental. If the ice sheet has been serving as a natural concealment system, its disappearance would require alternative methods for managing contact between human and non-human civilizations. The new surface structures detected by satellite imagery might represent a transition from hidden underground facilities to more visible installations. The increase in craft sightings might indicate a shift from covert to semi-overt operations as concealment becomes more difficult to maintain. Whether this transition happens gradually or suddenly, it will fundamentally change humanity's understanding of our planet and our place in the cosmos. The revelation that Earth has been home to multiple intelligent species, that advanced civilizations existed in our distant past, and that contact with non-human intelligence has been ongoing for decades would transform every aspect of human society. Scientific paradigms would be revolutionized by the discovery of technologies that exceed current human capabilities. Historical understanding would be transformed by evidence of advanced ancient civilizations. Religious and philosophical beliefs would be challenged by the reality of multiple intelligent species. Economic and political systems would face fundamental questions about humanity's role in a larger cosmic community. Educational institutions would need to incorporate new knowledge about human history and our relationship with non-human intelligence. But perhaps the most profound change would be psychological. Humanity would need to adjust to the reality that we are not alone in the universe, and that we may not be the most advanced intelligence on our own planet. This adjustment could be traumatic or liberating, depending on how the revelations are managed and how humanity chooses to respond. Antarctica, the sleeping continent, may soon awaken fully, and when it does, the secrets it reveals may be more extraordinary than any of us have imagined. For now, though, the ice keeps its secrets. The wind continues to blow across the endless white expanse, carrying whispers of ancient civilizations and hidden truths. Deep beneath the surface, in chambers carved from solid ice and warmed by geothermal springs, representatives of species separated by millions of years of evolution may still be meeting, planning, and preparing for a future that none of us can predict. The bottom of the world holds the key to understanding our true history and our cosmic destiny. Someday, perhaps sooner than we think, that key will turn, and the door to a larger universe will finally open. Until then, we can only wonder, speculate, and listen carefully to the whispers that emerge from the ice. Because in those whispers, carried on the Antarctic wind, may be the most important story our species has ever been told. The sleeping continent dreams, and in its dreams, the past and future merge into mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew about our world. Antarctica waits, patient and eternal, ready to reveal its secrets when the time is right. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. The ice remembers everything, and someday so will we.